In the 1970s, researchers began to look for tools that could help to answer some of the world's biggest social problems, like homelessness, food insecurity, health inequity, and more. They found no one framework that worked across disciplines. Sure, the natural sciences had their methods, as did the social sciences. But what about the intersectionality of these interdisciplinary and often wicked problems? In an attempt to solve these interconnected problems, a few researchers from the 80s and 90s developed a theoretical framework as a response. This framework is called critical systems thinking. Hello, everybody. My name is Jessica Kula, and I'm currently in my master's studying interdisciplinary studies. Today, I'll be breaking down critical systems thinking, covering the fundamentals of the framework, its historical significance and founders, real-world examples, and a critique of the framework. Put simply, critical systems thinking aims to look at things through a critical lens, exploring the role of power dynamics in a given system. This is done by promoting critical awareness, emphasizing the importance of understanding the strengths and weaknesses of a system, and by challenging assumptions. In order to truly understand what critical systems thinking really is, we need to understand 1, what a system is, and 2, the meaning of the word critical. I like to think of critical systems thinking as the love child between two really popular theoretical frameworks: critical theory and systems thinking. Systems thinking can be described as a way of thinking that looks at the whole of something rather than just as individual parts. It essentially rejects the idea of reductionism. Reductionism being the belief that complicated things can be explained by considering them as a combination of simple parts. Take, for example, a forest. A reductionist approach might simply look at the different types of trees that grow. A systems thinking approach would consider the trees and how they interact with things like the animals, insects, and weather. Created by Professor Jay Forrester in 1956 out of MIT's Sloan School of Management, systems thinking was historically used in engineering, mathematics, and natural sciences. It wasn't until the late 70s that soft systems, a type of systems thinking that explored the social sciences side of things, started popping up. Now let's have a look at critical theory. Critical theory is the study of social structures and is guided by the assumption that power dynamics directly affect knowledge in terms of what is learned and how it is learned. That is to say, critical theory believes that reality is a product of power relations, meaning that knowledge is inherently political and biased in nature due to the lens through which it has been written. This framework came out of the Frankfurt School in 1937 and was created by Max Horkheimer, Theodore Adorno, Erich Fromm, and Herbert Marcuse during a time where political unrest and capitalism versus communism was a prominent theme. Critical systems thinking, much like its theory namesakes, thinks of everything in terms of systems. It simply adds on an extra critical layer, exploring the social and political relationships between systems and analyzing how power dynamics come into play. There are 3 key assumptions foundational to critical systems thinking. The first is critical awareness, such as examining and re-examining assumptions and conditions. The second is emancipation, a focus on improvement considering power dynamics. And the third is methodological pluralism, using various research methods coherently to address different issues. An example of methodological pluralism would be a study. Rather than simply relying on quantitative data like numbers, methodological pluralism would argue that qualitative data, such as interviews, is also needed to paint a more whole and accurate picture of the study. Traveling back in time, it wasn't until the 90s that the intricacies of power dynamics and relationships started to be explored in the world of systems thinking. Critical systems thinking was largely developed at the Center for Systems Studies in the University of Hull and based on research by Michael C. Jackson, Paul Keyes, and Robert L. Flood. However, there is some discourse about who created the framework first. You see, Jackson, Keyes, and Flood were largely inspired by these two, C. West Churchman and Werner Ulrich. Churchman played a large role in the push towards soft systems in the 70s, arguing for the importance of considering values and ethical considerations when analyzing systems. Ulrich worked alongside him and built off of Churchman's work, later developing something called Critical Systems Heuristics, a 12-question CST-adjacent framework, and essentially a hands-on application of the ideology. Basing their work off the ideals laid out by Churchman and Ulrich, our ragtag trio of researchers are largely thought of as the founding fathers of CST. In 1984, Jackson and Keyes launched a research program in the Department of Management Systems and Sciences at the University of Hull, where they, alongside Flood, coined the term methodological pluralism, one of the foundational assumptions of the CST framework. From there, the following framework assumptions, emancipation and critical awareness, along with two others, social awareness and complementarianism, were identified as being foundational to CST. As the framework continued to develop, social awareness and complementarianism were dropped, being combined with the three main points of CST that we recognize today. Robert L. Flood was a huge proponent of the widespread exploration of the model, claiming if critical systems is to contribute to enlightened societal practice, it should be accessible not only to well-trained decision makers and academics, but also to a majority of citizens. His belief in the potential of the impact of the framework is evident, and in an effort to make the framework more widespread, Flood published 115 papers and a few books made available to the public. In 1992, Michael C. Jackson became the head of Department in Management Systems and Sciences at Hull University, launching the opening of the Center for Systems Studies. Jackson argued that systems thinking seeks to bring order to the jumble of competing system approaches. As long as we're critically aware of the strengths and weaknesses of each approach, we can harness them together in a coherent way to improve the activity management defined in the broadest sense. His center acted as a research hub to continue testing the efficacy of CST. It's also worth noting that during his time as a professor, Jackson wrote 187 publications on CST, as well as a variety of systems thinking approaches. Not to be forgotten, and with a background in mathematics and geography, Paul Keyes was instrumental in the early days of critical systems thinking, working alongside Flood and Jackson in helping with the development of pluralist meta-theory, which later led to methodological pluralism. In a 2004 paper reflecting on the creation of CST, Keyes claimed that critical systems thinking and practice offers the best hope for future well-being of management science and those it would serve. It's important to recognize that a lot of soft systems thinking, such as CST, tended to fall into the field of management science, which is the study of problem solving and decision-making in organizations. However, there are many real-world applications of the framework outside of organizations that we can also explore in today's day and age. One 2020 study by Fixen et al. Explored the implementation of CST in sustainable community expansion. The research team used the CST framework to outline the parameters for such expansion, addressing spiritual, ethical, and cultural community concerns, and created a list of critical questions that challenge assumptions about the past and present. An example question from the study asked, why, for instance, is one type of intervention working for some people and not for others? Through CST and in this research paper, locals are viewed as an essential part of the planning process and in examining the unbalanced power hierarchies of the government versus the people. Moreover, in this community expansion project, they looked at a number of different systems, such as housing, healthcare, and environmental sustainability, to fully integrate that critical systems thinking approach. This framework also shows great promise in the field of wicked problem solving. A wicked problem can be defined as a social or cultural problem that's difficult or impossible to solve because of its complex and interconnected nature. CST would allow problem solvers to explore how interdisciplinary, interwoven problems intersect through a critical lens, not only exploring how one discipline affects the other, but also how power dynamics add to the complexity of the situation. A major critique of theory is around the usefulness of systems thinking frameworks for solving complex social problems. Systems thinking is used to analyze the relationship between very clearly defined topics, which makes sense given its roots in math and engineering. As social systems are usually messy and intertwined with human values, cultural norms, and power dynamics, it makes it more difficult to define a single right solution. Even with a critical lens applied, many science researchers doubt the applicability of CST. Another critique of the framework is that while Flood and Jackson claim their work is meta-paradigmatic, meaning they insist on the use of multiple theories and paradigms, the argument could be made that it isn't possible in the existing framework. CST has its own core beliefs about how we know things, and is based on Habermas's 1987 theory of knowledge constitutive interests. This theory suggests that there are different types of interests that leads to different kinds of knowledge, which ultimately leads to how we understand the world. This core belief of CST would likely not mix well with positivist and functionalist frameworks, as they often have contradicting thoughts on how knowledge is acquired. In conclusion, critical systems thinking offers a world of possibility in interdisciplinary fields, allowing researchers to take a critical view of the systems they're studying. Personally, I'm excited to explore how CST is applicable in wicked problem solving for the education field, as there is certainly more research that can be done. Thank you for listening to this video, and I hope you guys learned a little bit more about critical systems thinking.